the book is underlying how joyful it is to create a process together that is outcome based, that you are aligning your ideas. But the process of aligning ideas is that you are going to try everybody else's idea as if it is your own. And that, to me, is true leadership.
Hello, and welcome to Stories Lived, Stories Told, a dialogue-driven podcast exploring how to create better social worlds through better communication. I'm Abby, and today I invite you to join me in conversation with Annie Fullard and Dorianne Cotter-Lockard as we take a communication perspective on collaboration, performance, and chamber music. To take a communication perspective is to consider what we're making and how we're making it through our communication practices. This means we look closely at patterns, context, stories, and relationships, and that we embody curiosity, mindfulness, collaboration, and dialogue to create better social worlds. So whether the topic of today's conversation is familiar to you or not, the hope is that using a communication perspective will reveal new ways of seeing and being for all of us. At the top of the episode, you heard one of our conversation partners for today, Annie Fullard. Annie is a violinist, and she is a founding member of the Cavani String Quartet. She's also an educator and the co-author of the book, The Art of Collaboration, along with our other conversation partner today, Dorianne Cotter-Lockard. She has served as a divisional C-level leadership team member of a Fortune 100 company, holds a PhD in human and organizational systems from Fielding Graduate University, among many other degrees, including a Bachelor of Music degree from the Eastman School of Music. Today, Annie, Dorianne, and myself are talking about their recent book, The Art of Collaboration, which focuses on both of their experiences with chamber music and dives into some really practical techniques for small groups to better collaborate together. Again, it's specifically for chamber musicians, but there's so many beautiful lessons to learn from them that we can apply to all of the communicating we do in every context of our lives. So I'm excited to learn from them today with you. One thing I would have you keep in mind as we listen in on this conversation today is, in what ways are you an artist? How do you embrace art in your life, and what does it teach you about your communication and your relationships? So with that in mind, let's begin the conversation with Annie and Dorianne. Hello, Annie and Dorianne. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today.
Thank you for having us.
It's fantastic to finally be able to meet you and to have this conversation.
Yes, this conversation's been a long time in the making, and I'm thrilled to be finally having it with both of you today to see where this is going to take us. So I think maybe particularly interesting to start with my question of how are we arriving in this conversation, acknowledging that we could have been answering this question very differently if we had recorded a long time ago when we had originally planned to, but just acknowledging that many things have happened in all three of our lives that have kind of pushed this recording to now. So, I'm just acknowledging that we're answering this question very differently than we would have if our original plan had come through. But I'm grateful for the opportunity to record with you now, because something that's front of mind for me is that I am acting right now as a caregiver to my partner who broke his ankle recently. And so I had to have surgery, get a plate and screws put in, is on crutches, and only this week is starting to put weight back on his foot. And so that has been a lot to really coordinate between the two of us. And it happened, suddenly and unexpectedly. So it was about us really having to try to adapt to this. And I've just been reflecting so much on how he and I communicate together and how we are experiencing the same event, which is him having broken his ankle and getting surgery, but we're having such different experiences. Him is the one with the physical injury, me is the one with all the responsibility of the caregiver. And so just because I know your work is about collaboration and specifically small groups and how we communicate and work together, especially in a like embodied way, I'm really curious to kind of think about my own recent experiences through the lens of this conversation today, and hopefully learn some good things from you all as well. The other thing at the top of my mind is I'm very excited and have become very curious about musical metaphors for communication and relationships. And so I think it's certainly something we'll talk about today. And what I'm particularly interested to note the similarities and differences between are that I'm surrounded by a lot of people. Dorianne, I know you know, like Sergey van Middendorp, Rick Spann, and Bart Buchner are people that I'm around that are all musical, very jazz, improvisational. And so I've found a lot of value in learning from them and their musical metaphors. But you all are in the chamber music world of things. And so I'm curious to see how that will be different to improvisational jazz or similar in terms of the lessons that you're distilling out of your musical experiences. So that's how I'm arriving. That's curiosity that I'm bringing to the table. And I would love to hear from both of you. How are you arriving? And Dorianne, can I go ahead and put you on the spot and have you answer next?
Sure. Thank you, Abby. I, first of all, really appreciate hearing how you are arriving to this conversation. Having gone through my own experience of having broken my elbow seriously and my husband being my caregiver, and this was 3 years ago, so it's history now, but it is a great learning experience for relationships and collaboration and communication.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess for me, how am I arriving at this moment as opposed to a year ago when we first started talking about having this conversation? Things have really changed in a year. I retired a year ago from teaching leadership at Saybrook University and Munich Business School. I finished some major projects in the last year, including our book, and the book was published in February. We did a launch in March. A lot has happened in my life. Speaking of caregiving, also caring for my mother, who is 93 years old, and helping her move into assisted living this spring. And gradually, over this past year, and particularly this summer, I've had much more time to play music, which is my big passion in life. And you'll hear more about how we arrived at creating this book, co-creating this book, and kind of my life journey to where I ended up meeting Annie. And so I've returned as an amateur musician playing chamber music. And I just spent a couple of weeks ago, I spent a whole week playing chamber music in a chateau in the middle of Burgundy, France. And it was such a joy to do nothing but play music and eat and drink and have great conversations with friends. So that's how I'm arriving here at the moment.
Thanks for sharing. That's helpful context to have and good to know. Annie, how are you arriving today?
Well, I will also second what Dorianne said. I'm sorry about your partner's ankle. I mean, that initial break hurt like.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And different people deal with pain and the ramifications of not being able to walk and get your stuff, and in different ways. Some people get a little bit grumpy, especially people who are male, just want to say. But being able to interact and basically put yourself in that person's place, right?
Yeah.
And the reason I'm bringing that up is because I arrive being excited about my second year starting a new job, which I last year applied for and then received this position. And so externally, it's a huge honor for me to be able to continue to do the work that I love so much, which is really helping people to listen to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And we have this incredible fortune to do this communication work through art,
Mm-hmm.
through the lens of beauty. And I don't mean just outward beauty. I mean the kind of beauty that comes from sometimes great suffering, from social context, from almost any given composer has some point of view, some human context, and then we as musicians have to bring that to life and share it with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't need words. So it's an incredible what we get to do, what Dorianne just shared with this week in Rambuteau, and what I get to do almost every day of my life is communicate with people without words.
Mm-hmm.
People that I don't know or are just meeting, particularly a younger generation of musicians coming into conservatory. I teach at two different, I guess you would call them music conservatories. And so I arrive excited to go into the school year and highly caffeinated because I'm not a morning person. So I have to have a lot of coffee in order to function, and just excited about small interactions that happen every day, cultivating those, because I think that's part of a larger resistance against the lack of communication.
Yes.
That we sometimes have.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those small interactions make a huge difference in the world. And that's what I try to impart to students as well. So
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, this is a great place to start. And it's really cool to get, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves now, but in a way, we've already got a little window into who you are and the lives you live. And so I think that's just a neat place to start. And I want to kind of just broadly ask what else, what is important to you, each of you, that people know about you as we go into this conversation, talking about your work, your lives, your book. So Annie, what would you like us to know about you? What else would you say by means of introducing yourself?
This is hard because I have this rebellion and reaction lately to this culture of let's be very self-involved and talk about ourselves, and I need more me time. I frankly am not that interesting. I'm interesting based on my relationship with people that I'm with. I do want to say and get this out there in public that the process of working on this book, okay, I'm going to cry now, allowed me to know Dorianne. Why am I crying? This coffee. Okay. So I'm a little bit emotional, but one of the great things about it was just sort of seeing the world through Dorianne's point of view and learning from her, and also like the combination of how strongly we both feel about the power of music, but particularly the kind of music that we play. I guess people consider chamber music a genre, but really chamber music should be life because it's about co-leadership. It's about listening. It takes away hierarchy. People tend to think about chamber music as classical music, which comes with its own set of pre-existing, what's the word I'm looking for? Assumptions on what that is.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that happened through the process of writing this book is that I realized it has little to do with what the genre is. Every composer, and I'm talking about whether you're talking about classical music from India or improvisational music from any culture, from the Greeks, which is what we mainly focus on, Western classical, takes its origins from Pythagoras, jazz, which takes its origins from the African continent and language and storytelling. But the relationship is how we relate to it together, and sort of finding that in through this book. In a way, it didn't even matter. When it finally did get published and it arrived in the mail, all I could think was, okay, this feels really good, but now, like, there's so many more things to think about. And I think that's a wonderful internal feeling. So, because we are very concerned about our achievements and external achievements, but I think to have a sort of core inside about a value system that is meaningful to other people rather than just yourself. And I don't even know where we started this question because I just went completely off the board.
It makes sense. And it's actually something I hear a lot, that when I ask people to introduce themselves, they start talking about their relationships. And I think that's beautiful and makes a lot of sense because, like you said, we are defined by our relationships and what we co-create together. None of us exist in any kind of bubble. And so as we think about ourselves and the construction of ourselves and the story we tell about ourselves, there's innately going to be other people interwoven into that very closely. So I think your answer makes a lot of sense, Annie. And Dorianne, how would you introduce yourself?
Well, before I do that, the audience is not seeing me, so you don't know that I rolled my eyes when Annie said, I'm not that interesting a person. So I want to say some things about Annie before I say a couple things about myself, because Annie speaks so eloquently about her feelings about, collaboration in the book and so forth. But I just want to highlight that Annie has so many great qualities that I have come to appreciate in the however many years we've known each other. We worked on the book for 10 years. And before that, I was conducting research at Cleveland Institute of Music, was where I met Annie and got to know her. She is one of the most passionate people I've met about many subjects, not just about music, but about social justice, about care for others. She's an amazing mother whose son is now grown and in his mid-20s and making his own career. And I've seen him grow up since he was 9 or 10 years old. And also an amazing friend, which Annie, when I was reflecting earlier before this call, I also was moved to tears thinking about our friendship. So I just want to say those things about Annie. There's so much more I could say. And I guess to introduce myself, I did a little reflection on who am I at this moment. And I would say for myself, I'm entering into my sage years, a part of my life where, because I'm retired recently, I still want to contribute to this planet, to life and to people, that I'm still filled with curiosity and passions. And so I still have a passion, not just about music, chamber music, collaboration, but also about how we develop as human beings, how we treat each other and how we treat the planet and the ecosystem, see ourselves in the ecosystem and intersecting ecosystems that we live in. So that's a big passion of mine. In addition to that, I love traveling because I love to see and experience different cultures and experiment and try the food and get to know people in different parts of the world. And so I think I'll stop there as far as describing who I am at this moment. I know you asked about what stories do we tell about ourselves. And I do want to tell a little story about myself because it ended up with this book.
Please, yes.
So in my youth, I was intent on becoming a professional musician, and I had a passion for chamber music since the time I was in middle school and high school. And I was fortunate to grow up in Berkeley, California, and be in a community that was co-created by Ann Crowden, my violin teacher, and others in the San Francisco Bay Area music community. And so I grew up with that. I went to music conservatory. So I went to the Eastman School of Music to study violin. And it turns out that Annie, by coincidence, who I met, 30 years later, 35, 40 years later, ended up also going to the Eastman School of Music. So we share that. Mm. I moved to New York City and I was a professional musician there for several years. And then at some point, I realized it was going to be very hard to earn a living as a musician. And I, at the time, was married to someone who's a member of a professional string quartet. And I saw how difficult that was. Mm. And even though that was a dream of mine. And so I ended up taking a turn in my life's work, in my career, and learned how to program computers. And I moved into technology and then became a leader in technology. And that was a 20-plus year career. And towards the end of that time, I decided to leave that and go back to school so that I could earn a doctorate in human development and organizational systems. And that was because during the whole time that I was in the technology space and leading people and groups of people, I was always interested. How can I help develop the people on my teams? How do the people on teams learn to work together and collaborate? Mm-hmm. And how do we mature ourselves as human and spiritual beings? And so that's how I returned to school. And I ended up doing my research on chamber music and how chamber music students learn to collaborate and work together. And that's how I met Annie at a coffee shop in Berkeley, because her quartet was visiting the Crowden Center. So there's another intersection with my old violin teacher and Annie's string quartet. And we talked, and she invited me to come to Cleveland Institute of Music to conduct this research. So I'm going to finish right there because I think Annie would love to tell other stories.
Dorianne's very eloquent and speaks in full sentences, and I jump around. So now you've got an idea of our writing process.
It's great. Yeah. You need a little bit of both.
Well, I think that in terms of my story from a very young age, I loved the way playing music made other people feel, because I wasn't that interested in practicing. But if it came to performing, and I'm not talking about performing with the stress and pressure and some kind of perfection, but mm-hmm. performing for people because it's meaningful in the moment, regardless of who your audience is, that was instilled in a really young age for me, that experience. And I then sort of try to pay that forward with students in a field like any arts field, there is a tremendous amount of discipline that goes mm-hmm. into what we do. There's a tremendous amount of research. There are hours, thousands and thousands of hours spent on the craft. But the point is, can you translate that into something that is meaningful? Mm-hmm. And that does not need to be because you won a competition doing it or because you played in Carnegie Hall. If you do those things, that's something that can create a kind of elation. Mm-hmm. But every performance should feel that same way. So I think that's been a story for me from a very young age, just the idea of doing something with other people. Mm-hmm. My quartet, the Cavani String Quartet, was founded when we were very young. We were in college and we had this idea. It was based on because we wanted to play this piece that we were obsessed with together. And again, that brings us to the arts as a conduit for breaking down a lot of barriers that people get hung up with in words, because we have this common love of this piece. And then we had fantastic mentors. So mentorship is something that it is an actual study, and there's a lot of academic research on it, but I just try to do my own version, which is just encouraging people to find that person in themselves that sees art and beauty as something that can reach and touch a universe of people. And that it's really, really, really important in the world for us to have that. So I'm a huge advocate of any arts organization and arts education, because I see it literally saving people's lives. And particularly in a country that tends to place value on the external. I noticed I listened to some of your other podcasts, Abby, and you work with and are surrounded by these people who really place value on more internal and the worth of the relationships around them, and then build. So actually, I wanted to say that when I looked at all of your guests for the podcast, even though I wasn't familiar with these people, some people I did some research on because I'm really curious about these things. And I thought that CMM was chamber music magic, but it turns out it's coordinated management of meaning equals chamber music. So anyway, but I just was struck. It made me really feel great that there are all these people out there, because if you just rely on what you get from the news, which I do read every day because I really find it very fascinating what's happening, both the good and the bad, and important to understand what our fellow human beings are going through in any given moment. But again, I come back to, wow, if we only could sit down and make music together, find that common language, perhaps there would be a relief from some of the external things that weigh upon us and that we let ourselves get hung up on.
Just to pull out one small thing of all the beautiful things you just said, I really appreciate the kind of distinction you made when talking about performance, not as a kind of perfectionism, but just as the literal act of performing on a stage or in front of people, because I'm thinking of, I just think that performance and a kind of performance that's wrapped up in like achievement or perfectionism is such a part of so many of our stories. And I'm thinking about my own self. My kind of musical roots are in high school. I participated in show choir, and I don't know if they have that everywhere, but it's, the singing and the dancing. And for me, it was a group of like 40 girls, that's a group that's, difficult to collaborate with in its own way. And I was like a kind of leader in that. And so I reflect on those experiences a lot. And then, not musical related, but performance related, I was also in high school and college on my school's speech teams. And so a lot of processes in terms of crafting a performance. And then in both of those scenarios, being almost exclusive, I enjoyed the experiences, but were, specifically to win something, to win a prize, to achieve, to, succeed. And so I think I'm doing, like Dorianne said, we're always learning throughout our whole lives. And so a kind of learning era that I'm in right now is trying to unlearn some of those things about worth and performance and success and the value of a performance, and making it more about the process, which is what I'm already hearing, both of you saying. And that, to start talking about your book more specifically, it's about chamber music. It's about teams working together, and it's called The Art of Collaboration. It's not the art of the successful, perfect performance. You're pulling the attention to the process of collaboration, which is relational, which is creative, which is really meaningful. And so I think, like you've said, Annie, I feel so grateful. I do not take it for granted to be surrounded by so many, I think, incredibly intelligent and also maybe more so than that, just really curious people who are interested in looking at what's going on in our relationships and our communication and what we are building together in a way that is really, I don't know the best way to say it, like less interested in the outcome, because they recognize that the process is where the value is. And it's kind of, not that you're never working towards something, not that you don't care about what the end result of what you create is. But I think I've interacted with people that have a different perspective around creating a good outcome, which is if you create a quality of process relationally, then almost always you'll get that outcome, and you will have, gone a better, more relational, more healthy, more effective path if you focus. So I'm curious to kind of dive right in and hear from you about your book, The Art of Collaboration. What's the kind of one-liner or short synopsis of it to start us off? And then what does it mean to both of you, this book?
Well, in the philosophical sense, it's the book is underlying how joyful it is to create a process together that is outcome based, that you are aligning your ideas. But the process of aligning ideas is that you are going to try everybody else's idea as if it is your own. And that, to me, is true leadership. So that's the underlying raison d'etre. Why am I speaking French? Okay. The underlying reason behind the generative qualities of the book. And then it's a practical guidebook, because the first 10 years of the Cavani Quartet's existence, we were all in our 20s, and we all communicated differently. And there was a lot of wasted time and tears and slamming doors and misunderstandings. And that's basically how people get through life most of the time. And we decided that in order to move forward and basically have more fun, that we wanted to capitalize on two things. What we did well, which was we have a good sense of humor. We like to eat together.
Yeah.
And we were passionately in love with this music. And we also trusted our mentors. We were surrounded by the people who tend to be in the world of, let's say, chamber music, both professional and amateur, and the students who are sort of have what I call the fever, tend to be very open, curious, but everybody's human. People are stubborn. They don't like their ideas. That people are insecure. There's not a whole lot of, for all of our dealing with ourselves, there's not a whole lot of self-awareness. And I believe you can find better self-awareness if you put yourself in somebody else's shoes. That makes sense?
Yeah.
If you're responding to something in the moment and really taking that in and, not responding with, well, I did, but with, oh, okay, you have this experience. What does that feel if I try that on myself? And then you put that in musical terms. So we came up with a system of techniques, and we gave them silly names like chamber music aerobics. Of course, we kind of grew up in the 80s. And expressive counting, we called that Shakespearean counting, because you had to put yourself into it to say words that were written 500 years ago that have the same meaning exactly today. You have to find a way of compelling people to understand the meaning behind those words, not just the words. And so we do the same thing with let's say we'll call it classical music, which has so many different meanings. Again, there's classical music on all continents in the world, but to interpret the musical language of a composer like Beethoven, we can find parallels in our own lives to his own experience. And you can also put yourself into his life, into his compositional mind. That's incredible. That's incredible. So in addition to the communication part, being a musician it develops this like neural pathways that are amazing, because suddenly you're in 1827.
Mm-hmm.
You're thinking about how life would be with no electricity, and where you had to ride your horse, and you had to write stuff down, and you had to read a book.
Yeah.
And so taking that and trying to translate it, and then we wrote these things down, because we realized that at a certain point, or at least I did, that as we were teaching, that these techniques worked. And we found that we used them when we would teach together in what we call like a masterclass situation. And we would take one of the techniques, and we found that there was actually instant transformation, because they're very concrete, and everybody can try them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just getting people to try them. But if you have a group around you that's being silly and willing to do that, then there is a magic that happens, like when everyone in your show choir is working together, right?
Yes.
That's very magical, even though you may fight getting to the point.
Right.
But I'm sure you had we call it a pedagogy of getting to that place,
Mm-hmm.
so that you could go on stage and feel confident,
Mm-hmm.
and perform in that beautiful way that we're talking about. So the book is filled with, I don't know, how many techniques, Dorianne?
About 40.
40. Okay. And, they're in sort of short little doses, so it makes it easy to
Mm-hmm.
try.
Mm-hmm.
And at any level of playing, you can try these, and they help with the group dynamic, and they're fun. And did I repeat again that sense of humor is that's really important?
Yeah.
I mean, and to be able to be silly,
Mm-hmm.
there's not enough silliness in the world.
Yep.
So,
I agree.
anyway.
Well, I want to pick up on something that you said, Annie, at the beginning of describing the book. You said it was foundational, this idea of try every idea as if it's your own. And to me, that foundation points to a commitment that when we're working together in a team or in a chamber music group, that we are committing to each other to be open and respectful. And there's a certain aspect that I think is important, in addition to having the sense of humor, bringing our whole self into the relationship and having empathy. So we do talk about empathy in the book as well, that we have to have empathy for each other, for ourselves, and for the composer. So there's that aspect to it. And I think, just to kind of describe a little bit of the shape of the book, is that the first part talks about how can we work well together. Mm-hmm. And so it brings in many elements that Annie has just mentioned already, that the having appreciation and expressing that appreciation. That's an important thing, to create an environment that's positive and supporting each other. As you try and experiment, you're trying other people's ideas. And so we've also woven in stories throughout the book from interviews that we conducted with 30 professional musicians, mostly classical chamber musicians, but also musicians who play jazz or other kinds of music, and instrumentalists of all types, so that we could have a broad representation.
Mm-hmm.
And so there actually is a great story in there that the Juilliard Quartet tells about trying each other's ideas as if they were their own. And I got to hear that story from two members of the early version of that string quartet, of how they were arguing over the tempo of something. And so they decided they would try each other's ideas in performance. So one night they were trying one person's ideas, and the next night they tried the other person's idea. And they came back at the end saying, I liked your idea better. So they both kind of turned around and appreciated each other. But because when they went into performance, they tried it with 100% conviction, the other person's idea that they didn't agree with it initially. So those are examples of the kinds of stories that we also include in the book. And there are sections in the book for all different kinds of techniques. And another thing that Annie said to me frequently was, as we were writing the book together, is that these techniques are designed as equalizers to help every person in the ensemble feel like they've got a voice, that they have an equal share in the responsibility for making the music together, and an equal share in the joy of experiencing working together and playing music together.
One of the most powerful techniques that we came up with was a nonverbal communication, where we did something, one of the most simple, fundamental ways of behaving, which is that you take turns. You just take turns. So each of us in the ensemble would take a turn sharing their interpretation of the music through body language. We have to convey a lot of rhythmic character, which is actually probably exactly the same as show choirs.
Yes.
Because if you're moving and you're speaking, the rhythmic coordination in the ensemble, part of that performance, and that's something that you want to have be on an elevated level. So we are actually mirroring each other and really listening to each other in an active way. And so we decided that the best, and I think that it was probably, I think our cellist sort of came up with this, it sounds very exaggerated, but that we were going to live, breathe, and die for each other. Like in that moment, there was nothing more important than what that other person was trying to communicate. But it is not a leader follower.
Yeah, right.
It is initiator and responder. And that's a really different sensation. So that the person who is initiating is actually more involved with the others in the group than themselves. And that's what a great conductor of an orchestra does. But our philosophy is that everyone in the group should own that feeling. And everyone when I am teaching, that's kind of, even though everybody wants to play together, there's no way that happens unless everyone is participating fully. And maybe that means that there's a little individual, kind of spice and energy in that. And then in a performance, you put that all together when you've each taken a turn being the initiator, and it's so powerful because it gives you the ability to be a little bit spontaneous and react in the moment to somebody, because you are what we call L-batting. And, I think that even in little situations that you go out into the world, I mean, we all have to go out and wait in line, or we're at the grocery store and somebody's cart is like careening towards, just like having your extra senses and allowing somebody else to initiate, and you can see that this is going to do it, and you could get stubborn and say, well, I'm right here and this is where I am, or you could just be aware and just like move around, or say, hey, how are you doing? Or, oh, I love those frozen peas from Trader Joe's. I get that too. So, just like that energy, and you can learn, this is a learned skill.
Yep.
And that's why I think everyone should get their instrument out. I don't care what it is, or you're singing, and go jam with people, right? It's so healthy. It's just so healthy.
I have to say, I totally love Live, Breathe, and Die. It is an amazing process and technique. And actually, that leads to your question, Abby, about creating a we presence.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
So first of all, when I first experienced the Live, Breathe, and Die, when I was conducting my research and I video recorded and observed Annie with her students and her other quartet members with their students, and experienced this process of the initiation and then the coming together of these different interpretations, what came to me was the idea that you're living and breathing together, and you're willing to allow your ego to die in service of the goal, the whole. And this idea of in service to the whole is how you co-create a we presence. The concept of we presence came in my research and reading and so forth from Alfred Schutz, who talked about a mutual tuning in relationship between musicians. He wrote an essay on musicians and how they work together. And the idea is you're sharing space together, you're sharing a temporal experience together. So you're playing music. So there's an external, there's a rhythm or a beat, and this could apply to jazz as well. And then you have your internal sense of time and space. And then the idea is to step into each other's stream of consciousness. So this happens. I know jazz musicians talk a lot about that, getting into the groove, and they're doing this. It happens with classical musicians as well. And this live, breathe, and die process really is a way of helping people get into each other's stream of consciousness and creating this. It's dissolving the boundaries between each other so that you're really as one. And the feeling is just an amazing feeling, emotionally and spiritually, and there's a joy to it, as Annie was saying about the joy of making music together when you can do something like that. And so that particular technique, in fact, Annie has, and both Annie and her quartet and I have done workshops in business schools and in business settings using this technique, and having people just sing like in groups of 4 or 5 happy birthday, and each person has their own interpretation. And how can you listen, and how can you allow and be creative, and really you have to let go of any preconceptions in that process. So I just wanted to add to that.
I'm so glad you did. And I'm just thinking that, wow, relationships are so hard, even when all you're doing is just being in the relationship, let alone when you have a goal to accomplish or something to create together, like a performance. And so all of this feels so meaningful for both of those. But I think who among us has never been in a small group or a group, whether it's at work, whether it's family doing something together, or friends, you're trying to accomplish something that does get really hard when everyone is so rooted in their well, this is what we should do, and this is my idea, and I am attached to my idea. What I love about CMM so much, and by the way, we use the CMM acronym as a lot of different things. So chamber music magic is great. Another favorite of mine is creating magic moments is another CMM. And so I think that's a beautiful way to think about what the theory and the practice of it offers, is just a reminder that you have choices. And so I think having the framework of something like a communication perspective that says, meaning is socially constructed and we're all just relating together and creating our worlds together, I think it enables you to hold on to your stories or your meaning just a little more loosely. And so you can open yourself up to other people's meaning and other people's stories. And so like all these practices you offered, or like the perspective of, okay, we're going to lean into this person's idea as if it's your own, now this person's, it's just this idea of getting to try things on. And I think that's the great thing about remembering that you have choices relationally or in whatever space in life, that you are not, just because your kind of instinct is to do one thing, you're not locked into having to do that. And so I think it's such a helpful practice to get to try on things, try out new ways of being. Just a recent story that's coming to mind for myself is that I was coordinating over email with some people I work with and had said, I think this little group of us should meet so we can all get on the same page about this thing before we go meet with the bigger group. And then someone responded, was like, I actually think we should do it the other way. I think we need to start more expansive, solicit ideas from this bigger group, and then the four of us can connect. And I immediately was like, oh, well, my idea, but I'm attached to my idea. I'm attached to needing this to be the right idea that we choose. But I opened it up to the other people in the group. I said, what do the two of you think? The people that hadn't responded yet. And they both were like, yeah, I think this other idea. And so I just had this moment where I felt very conscious of making a choice that I was like, I have to let go of being attached to my idea because I can see what they're saying. This is a great idea too. And it's just one of two options or one of probably many more options. And so that's my attempt, I think, to, I don't know if you would call that we presence, but just saying, okay, I'm going to let my ego die of being attached to me being the person who came up with the right idea and just lean into what this group is creating and saying they want, because there's no need to create that friction there and try to fight it. And so I think that is probably a real practice for people to cultivate, to, lean into what collaboration actually looks like.
Well, and I think that, imagine if we did this on a, political level. I think there are some people who do, but I think that one thing I like to point out to students is that the foundation of the United States of America came from this idea. That there's not just one leader that tells you this is how it's going to be, but that we have this right to discuss things. Mm-hmm. And in that discussion, it's not a free-for-all. It's that you bring ideas that have a relationship to the other people that are doing this. Mm-hmm. And that we have also the right to vote on these things, and that they are much less about hierarchy and much more about what can serve us in a common system that allows us to be happy. And so just reminding people of that, that's sort of the point, and it's an amazing idea. And that, it came from the 18th century and from many philosophies before that, just knowing your history, that just because you have an idea out of the top of your head, that we need to be thoughtful in how we present our ideas and our notions, and also be flexible in that not everybody may agree, but maybe we can listen to it and then go do more. It takes some work.
Yes.
Work.
Absolutely.
But if you inherently care if you have an empathetic sense and you've developed that, then the work is worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, so that's back to the book. These techniques that we suggest actually give kind of an instant gratification in any ensemble. And that I find is a catalyst for then deeper work, especially
Mm-hmm.
for students who are all about the outcome. They're, a grade or a test score, or where am I going to get next?
Mm-hmm.
But when you have this little victory of sort of something that somehow the group has actually been able to do together because you've tried a technique that's an equalizer, you walk out of the room feeling like you've done something that's much, much deeper than just, oh, I got a better grade
Mm-hmm.
or I played that note in tune. But those are all factors that come into this.
Mm-hmm.
So it does take a little bit of work, but we wanted to write these down because in classical music and in the arts in general, unless you go and talk to high school orchestra directors, high school choir directors, high school band directors, these are the unsung heroes of the universe,
Yes.
in my opinion, because they have pedagogy. They know how to get students to this point.
Mm-hmm.
They deal every year with this influx of like, and somehow manage to create something really beautiful out of that. And so I think as teachers, we should be students, and students should be teachers.
Yeah.
So I loved what Dorianne said about being a sage. I'm going to say that I am in my gardening phase. So I feel like a gardener, like you just never know what's going to grow, but you try to cultivate that, and you plant seeds, and sometimes it just goes like that. And sometimes something incredible and beautiful, and it doesn't last. And then you move to the next patch. And there are a lot of outside forces that are can either be great or difficult to work with, like nature. But the result, even if it's just one little blossom, that's gorgeous. So I don't know. I feel like I'm in my gardening stage.
I love that.
And I'm horrible gardener. Just by the way.
But metaphorically, you could be a great gardener.
That's how I kind of would view this stage. And I used to just be like a plant where somebody was watering me and I was growing and trying this and going towards this, and but I love that.
I
love the sage idea. I don't know about the gardener. That's a weird thing, but it just came to me. So.
No, I love it. And I love that we're catching both of you in these phases that are, testaments to all the phases that have come before, and, acknowledgement of there's more phases to come. So thinking about that as we kind of wrap up this conversation, I want to, again, just broadly ask kind of what else? What do you want to leave people with? And I think particularly something I'm interested in is just, continuing to expand the conversation, because I hope that it is clear that everything we've talked about today is not just for chamber musicians. You have a wonderful book that is great for them, but kind of what can we kind of extrapolate from the lessons you've learned, the experiences that you have all had for all of us, in terms of the live, breathe, and die, in terms of the we presence, in terms of any of it. What can we be applying, or what do you hope people are taking away from this conversation today?
I hope that some of the points that we've made about inspiring each other, about trying each other's ideas, putting egos aside, that's all of those things are you can apply no matter where you are in your life. And I think the reason why I decided to do this research on how the students learn to collaborate, work together through chamber music is because in my early life as a young musician, I really treasured those experiences of playing and working together in these small chamber music groups. And I was able to apply what I learned from that in the way I worked with people in the technology space and in the business space and as a consultant and a coach. And so I really, I hope that people who listen to this podcast can find some tidbits that they could apply in their lives.
Annie, anything you would add to that briefly as a hope for what people walk away from this conversation with?
I would like everybody to think of themselves as an artist in all things. And that can mean what it means. But to me, it means a little bit of freedom and experimentation, curiosity, and kind of seeing yourself in relation to other things in the beauty of those things. I would love for everybody to do more art, participate more, go to live concerts, go to theater, go to the movies, go the way you listen and look at things as sort of a creative moment. Try to think that way. It takes away, get away from the screen or having things answered for you. Make up your own answers. But really, and support education that involves arts curriculums. I mean, this is our only hope, Obi-Wan. This is it.
Yeah.
And I mean that in all senses, not just a limited sense. People, we love to have everything be in a compartment. I mean, across the board, of approaching even the art of capitalism, which is what we live in a sense of what does this mean? How does this bring joy and beauty to people? And I don't know, maybe we could keep that underpinning going. It's very quiet, but it's a quiet resistance and we need it.
Yeah, language that's coming to mind as you're speaking that I just really love from the CMM theory is that it refers to each of us as participant observers. And so it is so important to, even in the moment, be reflecting and to be listening. And that's probably something we could have a whole nother conversation about, of if you are playing music with a group, how you are speaking through your music and also listening at the same time. Beautiful metaphor for the communication in every part of our lives. But I just love seeing ourselves in that role, and feels very important that we do have a goal that we are working towards. We are creating something together as communities or societies or countries. We're the CMM language again is making better social worlds. And so if that's the goal, what are all these invisible elements of collaboration that are happening, stories we're telling, meaning we're making together? And so I certainly see the work that you all are doing as a helpful lens for helping us to orient towards, what does it look like for us to both participate and observe the creation of better social worlds together? So again, there's so much more to say. We'll point people towards your book. There's, this is just a pause in the ongoing conversation of this work, as you shared with me that you see this book as, the start of something and are excited to see what people will do with it, what turns that they will take out of that. So Annie and Dorianne, thank you just so much for your time today, for your perspective, and for the stories you've shared. It's been so wonderful to speak with you both.
Thank you so much, Abby. This has been a great conversation.
So nice to meet you. You have a great vibe. Even through the Zoom screen.
Thanks, Annie. I really try. I do really try.
Okay, that is all for today's episode. But remember, the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. There are so many ways to stay in dialogue. First, you're always welcome to reach out to me to share your reflections, questions, and ideas. There are also a number of online spaces where you can comment, including the Stories Lived, Stories Told Instagram and the CMM Institute Substack. Links to all these places to connect are in the show notes. If you want to stay up to date, a couple things you can do are follow the show wherever you listen, leave a rating and review, share this episode with someone you want to invite into the conversation, and subscribe to the CMM Institute Substack to get every episode right in your inbox. Stories Lived, Stories Told is an initiative of the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. You can learn more about the CMM Institute and our other initiatives, including our other podcast, Cosmo Parenting, and all our free Cosmo activities, as well as Cosmopolis 2045. There's also the CMM Institute Fellowship and the CMM Institute Press. We have so many great resources that we are so excited to share. Again, links to all of that can be found in the show notes. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abby, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.